Today I'm going to be comparing some of the most popular side mount seat brackets available for S chassis. This is like a big discussion in the S chassis community on which mounts go the lowest, which mounts are the best. So I'm just going to try and do a comparison today so you guys can get a feel for some of the most popular things out there. Over here we have the eBay side mount bracket and slider combo. This is considered like the super low one. A lot of times made by the generic company of PLM, I believe. That's over here. For the Street Faction section, we have both the Street Faction side mount bracket alone, as well as the bracket with the slider combo over here. Moving on, this is the Bride Low Max LF seat rail and slider side mount bracket setup. And we'll just go through a few different topics on each of these. First thing is going to be the fit and finish and overall quality of it. So to start off with the eBay, the welds broke on these. They didn't fit when I originally put them in. They needed to get modified in order to fit. And then after that, even when I got them to fit, they still didn't sit low enough for where I could have my helmet on in the car and not hit my head on the ceiling. So I actually have to cut and modify the brackets to sit even lower. Then like I said again, the welds broke on it. So I actually needed to re-weld along this part of the bracket right here. So pretty bad finish on it, and just overall doesn't fit, bad quality. I would not recommend that whatsoever. Okay, moving on to Street Faction. Street Faction, super nice quality, right? You got, I believe these are all powder coated right here. They have really nice finish. These have been installed on my seats and in my car. I'm gonna say anywhere from 5 to 10 times while I was doing the testing. Finish is still great on them. They fit nice as well. They got a ton of adjustability built into them, so they got like a ton of different setups that you can do. One of the things that they went over with me when I was picking these up was that you can actually flip this bracket around and swap it with the other side. So if you're a shorter person, you can actually have the larger side in the back, so you can help pick yourself up, and that accommodates the shorter driver. So a ton of adjustability in these. The only complaint I had was that there is this bar in between, so this is only going to be affected if you're using the slider combo with the bracket. And the issue I had with this was that it was a little bit too narrow to actually reach both the sliders on both sides, so that way they can lock into the sliders and then pull it up, and then your sliders can move back and forth. So as you can see right here, there's two holes on the side. They pop on like that, and it wasn't quite wide enough to reach the other side slider. Now, like I said, this is a really adjustable setup, so I kind of feel like it's just the fact that it's so super adjustable that the width can change all the time with the sliders and how you set up your seats. So, I mean, it's kind of hard to actually make a setup that would work on every single application that you would have to put that in. So, all I did to get around that was opened it up, ended up bending these back in, and that got to fit. Moving on, Bride as well, super nice quality over here, great fit and finish. Fits perfectly, no issues whatsoever. It actually has two metal pieces that connect the sliders together, so that way it goes in a lot easier. Not as adjustable as, let's say the Street Faction one where everything is separate and everything is super adjustable. So you do lose some of the adjustability, but at the same time you do gain the ease of installation because everything is attached to one another. Something to note about the Bride and the Street Faction is that they both have an issue when running your seat at the lowest position, that you actually can't pull up on this handle for the slider all the way to release the slider, because the seat sits so low that it actually touches this handle right here, and you can't pull up enough to where it can release the mechanism. And I also can't get it onto the lower hole, and that's just because it is touching the handle for the slider itself. So that's the same exact thing that happens with the Street Faction, and it seems to just be a thing, I guess, if you have a super low bracket, it's just going to end up hitting the bottom of the seats. That happens on both the Bride as well as the Street Faction with the slider attached, and it only happens with the lowest position up front. So I just thought I'd let you guys note that. Moving on, next category, we got weight, and I got notes so I don't mess up the weights. Okay, so for eBay here, these things weigh 9.8 pounds. For the Street Faction, just the bracket itself, not with the slider attachment, you're looking at 6.75 pounds, so incredibly lightweight. You're gonna move on to with the slider attachment, right, which is where you would bolt this slider in between the side mount bracket and then the bracket that goes to the car. That right there weighs in at 12.06 pounds. Then for the Bride, as you see right here, this weighs in at 14 pounds. Something to note about when I'm weighing it, I weighed them all together. So for the eBay setup right here, I weighed all this as one. For the Street Faction setup, when I was weighing just the bracket with no slider in between, I made sure to take it off on both sides, and I weighed both of them on there. Then when I wanted to go and weigh them with the slider, I attached the sliders, of course, and put the handle on there to go and weigh it. For the bride, it's exactly what you saw. Pick this up and put it on there, and that's how you weigh that. Now that you know the weight, we're gonna move on to the actual lowness of the brackets themselves and how low they get the seat. So all of these tests are done with the same exact seat, and the lowness measurement is taken from the top of the headrest to the ceiling of the car, which means that the greater the distance, the lower the seat sits. So just heads up on that. So for the eBay bracket here, we have 7 5/8 inch from the ceiling to the top of the headrest on the seat. I took 2 different height measurements for the Street Faction bracket. So the first one is by making everything at a usable height, right? So this is like a nice seating position. It's at the lowest position possible to where you can still pull up on the handle, and that got it down to 7 3/4 of an inch. Then when I kept it here at the second highest position up front, and I dropped it all the way down low in the back, so a little bit more lean back to it, but that way I could still pick up the handle. Not the best seating position for people. I got it to go at 9 inches from the top of the headrest to the ceiling, so a lot lower. And then finally, with just the Street Faction bracket, no slider attached, and with everything at the lowest position, I got it down to 9 1/4 inch. Something to note is that because this bracket like makes everything so super level and low down, that 9 1/4 inch without the slider in there makes it so it's like I could barely see over my steering wheel at that height. It's like ridiculous how low these brackets actually make your seat sit. Moving on to the Bride Lomax LF. So with the second position all the way around. So right there and right there, which makes it a nice usable height. And also something to note is that the Bride, like Lomax bracket in general, sits a little bit lower in the rear. So this is with a little bit of rear rake still. That makes the height 8 inches, okay? And then when I kept it in the middle up front, so you could still move this, and then dropped it to all the way lowest in the back, okay? So because this bracket already makes it sit a little bit lean back, when I go even further back down in the back, it makes it like crazy, like rear rake in your seat. Like I wouldn't even drive the car in that setup whatsoever. But if you did want to drive it around in that setup, you could get it down to 9 1/2 inches. Although I will tell you right now, the 9 1/4 inches on the Street Faction without the slider, so everything is level, feels a lot lower than the Bride setup because the Bride kind of just dips the back, which is where I'm taking the headrest measurement from. And so it's not like the best comparison method on how to get the height on that. Anyways, we'll compare more later on. So right now I'm just gonna give you the price for everything. So the eBay brackets over here, generally you can find them anywhere in between $105 to $110. For the side mount brackets from Street Faction for the S chassis, these are $158. And then if you want the Street Faction setup with a slider included as well, which will be installed like so, this is available for $190. Moving on to the Bride LF seat bracket setup right here. This in general, usually average, it goes for around $240. Now that you know all the little facts about it, I'm just gonna give a run through and a general comparison of everything. So to start off with, the eBay ones. eBay ones in general, I just don't recommend these. Okay, so these are like $105 to $110. If you're really that much on a budget, save up a little bit more, okay, and you just get the Street Faction setup. So the Street Faction, the most basic setup is $158. So about $50 more than the eBay setup, but at least you have something that fits. You have something that is nice, good quality, and the welds aren't gonna break on it and need re-welding. It's gonna go super low with this setup right here, and you're not gonna have any issues. So if you are on a budget, I would recommend this setup. And whatsoever, just don't even buy the eBay because you're essentially just throwing your money away. I don't think this is worth it whatsoever. It's like biggest hassle ever. Speaking of the Street Faction setup without the slider in it, this weighs the least out of everything. In my mind, if I'm building like a time attack car or a car in general where like every single pound and ounce matters, then I'm gonna choose this setup right here. I know it can go low. This goes the lowest in the most drivable position. So yes, the Bride goes low, but it goes low with your back, lean back all the way. This makes it so your entire body sits flat, and it makes it so like you can't even see over the steering wheel. It's like ridiculous how crazy these things go low. If you're building a show car and you want something that looks pretty, this, in my opinion, is a very nice looking design. They have Street Faction engineering right here cut out into the side of this panel. It has a nice little design over here. So in general, if I was building a show car, I'd also go ahead and pick these brackets. If you want something that's super adjustable, again, I'd go with these. So the Bride setup is a great combo setup, but at the end of the day, there is a lot more adjustability in the Street Faction setup. So if I'm looking for that adjustability, I'm gonna go ahead and get these. And like I said, you can flip these around too to accommodate shorter people as well as taller people, so that's good. Now moving on to the setup with the slider. This weighs just a little bit less than the Bride setup does. Again, lots of adjustability here. You are gonna have a little bit of issue with installing your handle on it. So that's just like a little bit of an issue that I see. The great thing is though, is this setup is cheaper than the Bride and the slider is detached from it. So in my mind, I'm thinking, hey, you know what? If you get something that has a slider on it and you're like, I don't really need the slider mechanism or I want my seat to go even lower, you can just remove it. And then you end up having the normal Street Faction bracket setup. So you got a ton of options there. You can add the slider, remove the slider, do whatever you want. But like I said, the advantage of having this setup is it's super customizable and it's super adjustable. And it's only $190. Moving on to the Bride, this is the most expensive as well as the heaviest setup out of all of the choices here. The nice thing about it, besides of course it is good quality and it fits your car and it does its job, is that it has a metal piece connecting the two different sides of your bracket together, and that makes your installation really easy because you have a lot less setup involved because the bases are attached to one another, unlike the Street Faction setup where there's so much adjustability. In my mind, where I see the Bride is good is if money's no object, you want something that's easier to set up. You don't need that extra adjustability. You for sure want to run a slider. This will go about 1/4 of an inch lower than the Street Faction one, with the with the seat actually set up at a nice driving setting. Same thing with this. This will sit at 7 3/4 of an inch, nice driving setting. This will sit at 8 inches with nice driving setting. So it will go a little bit lower. Overall, I think that these 3 different setups over here are good, but the eBay setup, that just should be avoided at all costs. There's no reason to really even buy the eBay setup when you can have the Street Faction setup, just the bracket alone, for $158. Anyways, that's it for this video. I hope that helped you guys in deciding on what combo you want to go with in your car. And that's going to be it for now, and I'll see you guys in another video. What I suggest everyone doing too is don't do it while you just drove the car like I did, because it's going to be ridiculously hot.